So I decided to make a fifth video, and in a way this will be the first video. So I had kind of a funny design intention with the layout of the muscle testing course, which is it's tough to get to what muscle testing is if you look at the first video. And that was very intentional because I don't want people jumping in and looking at this method. So I'm going to go over just a couple research points. There are peer-reviewed studies in muscle testing, but there's been hundreds of schools of thought of muscle testing, and I'm going to explain what muscle testing is. So the research is a little bit incomplete, and I alluded to this a little bit, but I want to talk about what muscle testing is, what it's used for. So the origins of muscle testing come from basically George Goodhart and the chiropractic field. And so many chiropractors, when they're scanning the spine to see is there a problem here, is there a problem here, what they'll do is literally push on an area that is stressed. And in that moment, your body goes into a stress response. And it just so happens that when you're in a stress state, you're stressed out, your body is less able to coordinate a muscle response. So the muscle test is a test of basically whether your joints can lock. So one of the ones that I teach in the video is an O-ring test, which probably has the most peer-reviewed research on it. That's Yoshiaki Omura's bidigital O-ring test. There's an old documentary from him going back to the 1980s, and Omura was an interesting guy. So he's a professor at NYU now, but he was working he was the head of a major department in a hospital in Tokyo, and he was using a muscle test that measures again, not the strength of the finger's ability to squeeze together, but simply whether or not it can lock. So you have straight arm muscle tests where you hold out your arm, and when you're strong, if I push down, it kind of locks, it pops up. But if it's weak, the shoulder will slowly click down. Dr. Omura's test looks like this. He's pulling apart the ring of the finger. So if I stressed myself, if I pushed on a vertebrae, let's see if I can find one, I can literally go through and test that one, and it doesn't cause enough of a stress state for me to go into a weak muscle state reaction. So we're looking for positive and negative reactions, and the cool thing about it is you're able to test anything. So it's not like theoretical, it's not like, I think you have a problem with gluten. We can test right then and there. If I add gluten to your system, does gluten cause stress to you? So we add the gluten, and we can even see if I expose the gluten to the liver, does it cause a problem? Maybe not, or the stomach, whatever, spleen, pancreas. We can go to the pancreas and find, viruses. The Coxsackie virus is a major stress for the pancreas. And all this is, so let's say I took a variable, like a vial with the homeopathic frequency of Coxsackie virus, which is literally what's most commonly used in muscle testing, or we have other mechanisms to expose the variables we want to test, including computerized mechanisms. I could expose the Coxsackie signature. One of the items, one of the ways that we test is actually sound recordings of infections. Like they went down to these old coal mines, I believe, in Germany, in just like 1,000 feet down, 2,000 feet down, where there's no sound, and they recorded the sound of microbes. So when your body hears Coxsackie virus, if it doesn't have a major response, then probably Coxsackie virus wasn't an issue for you. But if your body starts freaking out as soon as I expose the sound of Coxsackie virus, then it's kind of like seeing your old ex or something like that, something that's like, shocking to the body. And so we can measure that with muscle testing, but as I was saying, muscle testing's in the field of biofeedback. So some of the other things that you can do, there's electrodermal scanning, which measures the way your pores of your skin open up to emit sweat. And so there's computerized tests that measure whether the pores start to open up as an indicator of a stress state. There's also heart rate variability testing. The HeartMath is a big institute, and they do research that show, the rhythm of the heartbeat subtly changes in a stress state. So, yeah, I like muscle testing. I'm gonna probably put 3. So the old muscle testing, the longest research base, is that chiropractic style, which is taught more or less every chiropractor is familiar with that type of applied kinesiology. And so they'll push on a different area and see whether it causes a stress. Um, Sometimes they'll use muscle testing. Also, when you're in a stress state, there's other tests. There's a whole bunch of other tests. So one thing is your posture will very subtly align. So if I pull say you're laying on a table and I pull your hands out and I see whether your fingertips line up or whether they're uneven, and then I poke the place in your back, like say they're lined up, poke the place in the back, then I pull out your hands again, and they're uneven, and I adjust it, and they should go back to normal or whatever. So there's other little subtle indicators that, by and large don't have a huge research base. Maybe that's because of methodology, maybe that's variability of efficacy in different types of methodology. So the research conversation is a little bit big, and I don't want to oversimplify it. So I'm going to include a review of applied kinesiology research just to, for more heady types. It's like a 200 and something page document that includes numerous studies from the applied kinesiology field. I'm also going to include the papers from Dr. Klinghardt. A lot of his muscle testing papers were published in Yoshiaki Omura's journal called Acupuncture Electrotherapeutics. So, for example, just, when you try to get into the frame of mind of what can we create that's researchable, one of the studies that Dr. Klinghardt did was they measured, there's a subtle indicator, which I'm not going to describe the whole thing, but there's a subtle indicator that they look for, and it's there's a number that's put to it. So it's called an opening angle. It doesn't really matter what that means, but they had, I think, 20 different practitioners of his type of muscle testing, and they all came within a very, very close. So they were all able to find the same results in their patient base. So there's a study like that. Dr. Omura, he had in some of his tests, his studies, up to 97% accuracy. You can watch a YouTube documentary from the 80s. So his stuff, which is roughly what my course is based on, is the bidigital O-ring test. That was used to diagnose cancer. Like, he would locate a cancer, and then he would be able to test what type of cancer it was. And then they would use an MRI and find, was the cancer that he said was there, was it there? And in some of the studies where he used that technique, he had a 97% accuracy. The reason I don't stand behind, all of muscle testing, give some really good schools of muscle testing, but you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. There's a lot of the way the practitioner behaves, the practitioner's beliefs. If a practitioner really believes that everyone is gluten intolerant, it's much more likely that if you see them, they're going to find that you're gluten intolerant. If they believe everybody needs vitamin C, or if they believe that this brand of supplement really works, so there's a lot of supplement sellers out there. Obviously, I'm creating a course which is very novel. There's no purpose or reason for me to be doing it other than it was my experience, and for me, largely it worked. I'm not profiting off this, but you do have to be cautious there, because there's all these different types of muscle testing, and some of them are purely just like psychic kind of stuff. Like, do what would be a good example of one of the more psychic muscle tests? Um, like, should I go to the park and muscle test? Like, literally asking questions. Whereas the muscle testing that's taught by Dr. Klinghardt involves more physically exposing items to the body and then measuring for a response. So that's my basic, 5 minute. I see it's not 5 minutes. I'm at 12 minutes or whatever. That's my basic thoughts and themes about muscle testing. Dr. Klinghardt, another piece that I should add here, he's so aside from being probably the biggest name working in holistic health with autism, and more cases off the spectrum than more or less anybody else, and one of the biggest names in the chronic, like, Lyme disease field. The average patient who sees Dr. Klinghardt has been to 30 other doctors, and for me, training in that system, it was miraculous. It was just plainly miraculous. I had just spent 2.5 years studying nutrition, and I stumbled across this technique that I could test all of the theories that I had been learning about. So it became immediately employable and useful. And in my first year of practice, the most common feedback was someone saying that they were going to fire their doctor because I had taught them more in the last hour than they had learned in the last 3 years. But just more on Dr. Klinghardt's research, aside from whatever people know him for and the good stuff he's done with autism. Alzheimer's is a big focus for him right now. He's the reason that of mercury as a toxin. So I believe it was the late 70s, early 80s, he was using muscle testing, and he found people were having massive negative responses to mercury. And there was another nutritional scientist, Dr. John Pangborn, who created the laboratory Doctor's Data, which is still one of your mainstay holistic health labs. He created Doctor's Data more or less specifically to test this issue. So it was through muscle testing that it was learned that mercury is an issue. I think that's interesting, or it says something. Even if for me, I feel like maybe it's because I'm a former teacher and I was a middle school teacher. I feel like I'm the moderator when it comes to holistic health things. People saying really crazy stuff and doing detoxes and flushes, and it's like, okay, well, it came from a pretty research-oriented background, and there's enough peer-reviewed research now to validate concerns about mercury in the environment. And the techniques to address the mercury were very, scientifically analyzed, and using research, and then you have someone say that you need to go on this or that cleanse or whatever. I don't want to poo-poo anybody, but so for me, Klinghardt represents the upper echelon of science in the holistic world, and I know that there are some who maybe might not see that. So anyway, yeah, thanks for letting me record a video. I just want to show really quickly, I'm going to do one of the basic tests from the class. And again, I didn't want to do a simple, I don't want to start the class and say, here's what we're learning, because I didn't want someone to see me do a very basic version of the testing and then think that they could do it. So I build up for about 2 hours before I show the technique properly being used. And that's for good reason. So I've got some candy, and then I'm going to get some insulin. So I'm going to draw out maybe 5 units. This is Basiclar, which is a generic of Lantus. So this is a long-acting insulin, which I'll put here. And then Admelog, which is a generic of Humalog. So this is a fast-acting insulin. And so what you're able to do with the muscle testing, this is absent of any technique, and this is if you're learning the technique, it will take you 2 or 3 hours to come close to doing it correctly. There's different ways to make sure you're getting accurate results. So don't watch me do this and expect to be able to do it. So I'm going to expose the variable to myself. Like, I can hold it, and I'm just going to hold it because I don't want to show the other techniques and have people try doing it who've maybe seen muscle testing once. And I can test just by seeing, does it make my body stronger, or does it make it go weak? And so candy, right now, I go weak. And I'm going to test my long-acting. Again, there's a couple ways to expose yourself, the variable to your body. So I'm going to... So this one, we count the responses. So the sugar tests -4. Like, my body's like, no way. The Basiclar at that dose tests moderately negative. It's not completely bad, but it's not really what I want. And then the Humalog tests positive, right? So I've got about a unit or so in here. And I had kind of a weird meal. So then I can go through and test, is it this dose or that dose? And I'm literally just using the O-ring test and the countable system. And I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because I don't want to waste your time. So I can find the dose that tests optimally. Moreover, I could, this candy isn't something I would really be choosing to eat right now, but if I ate this candy, how much insulin would it require? Right? And I could find a dose that would, match the candy. And of course, with candy, it creates immediate question marks there, because let's say you're having some big stupid meal that I wouldn't eat, like you're eating a giant pizza. It might be the case that taking insulin at 3 different times, 5 different times, before, during, and after that meal would test optimally. So, I think that, but you can approximate this is the amount of insulin it would take to cover, but there's some more advanced ways to do that. I wouldn't necessarily suggest going about doing crazy stuff just because you muscle tested the dose. But yeah, when I first did that technique, it just stuck with me. Dr. Klinghardt mentioned patients that he had tested their insulin dose for in a type 2 diabetic population or context, and he was using that to describe, we do get accurate results here, and people are questioning the science of what we're doing. We can dose insulin, and he made it pretty clear, that's a life or death issue. You can't mess up. That's not an option to get the insulin dose wrong. So The first year when I did that, I incorporated it in pretty gentle ways, and I was always really specific about, I tested this amount, and then I checked my blood sugar an hour after, 2 hours after, 3 hours after, 4 hours after. This was like 2012 or something, and I certainly didn't have a CGM, and I was just amazed with the results. I was also amazed at where my body would want to be. Like, I'm not sure what you call it, maybe the basal level. Like, Dr. Bernstein says we should be 83 before, during, and after, and I found that to be certainly true. My body would feel happy if it was like 67, anywhere up to 90, but in general, the low 80s range, sometimes high 70s. So that was interesting. My body really did like being there. And the way that I tested that was just, a little bit of sugar and a little bit of insulin. Does my body want any sugar? Does it want any insulin right now? And when you get used to living that way, kind of you get a little bit more faith. So after that, the couple weeks of, wow, that's incredible, I can't believe that worked, and that turned into more of a trial phase. And then that turned into, you know what, I'm not going to check my blood sugar all day, and I'm going to see what's going to happen. And then it turned into a thing where I could do that without thinking about it. So I'm sure in some ways this will be a useful technique for someone. But yeah, again, the process, that's a good example. If your body actually wants your blood sugar to be at a certain level, the muscle testing we do, it kind of approximates, some truths that when it comes to testing what foods your body wants. Muscle testing covers a lot of that stuff, but we are looking for the truth. So it does lead to interesting things. Like one of the things that I learned is most of the supplements that I was using weren't working for me, weren't doing much at all. And so and then I found I had blockages, I had different problems, and so anyway, that's a little bit about my story with muscle testing, why this existed. I hope that's helpful. I'm just a little bit leery about broadcasting stuff about muscle testing because some anti-holistic people don't want to acknowledge my life experiences, and I've just been a little bit traumatized online, so I need to do some therapy for that. So anyway, yeah, this will be the intro. I'll include links to science below, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions.